General Hospital spoilers suggest that Drew Cain may end up in a wheelchair following his paralysis. Will a spinal injury turn Drew's world upside down and compel him to face new challenges? There could be a reason why the GH authors had the shooter fire 2 shots into Drew's back. The bullets wound extremely close to Drew's spine, thus there's a possibility of paralysis in this story. Drew may discover that he lacks mobility when he awakens. Drew may face some challenging updates if he is crippled and forced to adapt to life in a wheelchair. Of course, depending on the severity of his injuries, Drew may be able to regain use of his legs, but he will likely face agony and physical treatment. Drew may become a more sympathetic figure as a result of this predicament, which he might take advantage of. Drew may use this as another manipulative weapon, especially if he continues to pretend to be in a wheelchair after recovering. As for Drew's recuperation, we know he has connections for cutting-edge procedures. Drew demonstrated this by assisting in the planning of Kai Taylor's groundbreaking surgery. This could even relate to the tale that Jen Sidwell, Professor Henry Dalton, and Britt Westbourne are all involved in. If Britt can receive a medicine to assist heal her Huntington's condition, Drew may also benefit from a miracle paralysis cure. It could be used as leverage by the mystery boss to exert control over Drew and potentially broaden his intentions. Regardless, we must contemplate the potential of Drew becoming paralyzed on some level and finding himself in a wheelchair shortly. Those bullets coming that close to Drew's spine might have serious effects. According to General Hospital teasers, Cameron Matheson recently hinted at Drew's retaliation and provided a clue to his character's survival. Matheson made a "I'm gonna punch right back" comment in an interview with SOD, implying that Drew isn't done wreaking havoc in Port Charles. Cameron Matheson debuted as a Drew recast in 2021, portraying a decent guy. Drew remained a heroic character over several plots, but GH writers eventually decided to move the character in a darker direction. Although Matheson was initially hesitant to make the switch, he eventually came to enjoy the thrill of playing a villain. Matheson said it was like a little fantasy escape because he's definitely not this bad in real life. Matheson now goes with the flow and leans toward playing a villain. The program surely offered a whodunit when a strange intruder shot Drew twice in his own home. To set up that twist, Matheson admitted that they had to take Drew to some truly unpleasant areas. Even Matheson was stunned by some of Drew's low punches and bad strategies. Matheson admitted that dealing with the changes in his character was difficult at first, but it became easier as the story progressed. Matheson also made some fascinating comments about the Drew mystery. Laura Wright hinted on social media last month, comparing Drew to J.R. Ewing is from Dallas, and Matheson made the same connection. "You know, I used to watch Dallas, and it's extremely similar to the Who Shot J.R. story's tale. I don't care if you're the punching bag for all of Port Charles, you're still at the heart of the plot, which feels pretty amazing. I'm like, bring it on. Let me be the punching bag. I got this, and I'm going to punch right back," Matheson stated. Of course, if Drew still has some fighting spirit, he may not be as dead as many fans imagine. Cameron Matheson replied to a fan on Instagram in August, confirming that he was not quitting the show. If that's the case, it explains why Matheson is still talking about hitting back and possibly plotting Drew's retribution now that he's been shot a few times. We should also take note of J.R. Drew survived his own whodunit on Dallas, which seems like another hint that he might do the same. The hospital room was a sterile cage of white walls and beeping devices, where time appeared to stretch and constrict in terrible, unpredictable ways. Drew lay in bed, his legs stiff beneath the thin cover, his hands resting on his stomach, fingers twitching as if looking for something to grab onto. The accident had occurred 3 weeks prior, but the memory remained a sharp shard implanted in his consciousness, replaying in vivid bursts, the screech of tires, the weightless moment of impact, and the world spinning into darkness. The doctors reported a spinal cord damage. The T12 vertebrae shattered. They labeled it incomplete paralysis, implying that there was a glimmer of hope, but not much. Drew, a man who used to explore mountains, play pickup basketball, and dance at weddings with a reckless grin, was now confined to a wheelchair, his world turned upside down. He awoke every morning to the same reality, which he could not escape. His legs, which were once powerful enough to carry him through marathons, were now immobile, like silent passengers in his body. The nurses moved with trained precision, adjusting tubes and monitoring monitors, their voices faint and distant, like if speaking to someone else. Drew's wife, Sarah, was present every day, her eyes ringed with tiredness but filled with determination. She'd clasp his hand, assuring him that they'd get through it and adapt. Drew could feel her worry, though, in the way her smile faded when she thought he wasn't watching. He tried to console her, to assure her that he would be well, but the words felt empty, like lies he couldn't tell. The first time they moved him to a wheelchair, it felt like a betrayal. The chair was sleek, lightweight, and intended for mobility, but Drew saw it as a reminder of everything he had lost. The physical therapist, Mia, a young woman with a no-nonsense braid and an unwavering cheerfulness, led him through the process. "Push with your arms," she said, her voice firm. "You've got this." Drew's arms trembled as he grabbed the wheels, his shoulders burning with the strain. He walked a few steps, then stopped and stared at the floor, his breath ragged. Mia applauded as if he'd just crossed the finish line, but Drew felt no victory. He felt like a child beginning to walk, but this wasn't a step toward independence, it was a step into a life he didn't know. Rehabilitation became his new habit, a tough series of workouts designed to strengthen his upper body and retrain his mind. Mia showed him how to traverse doorways, transition from chair to bed, and balance on uneven surfaces. Every chore reminded him of his limitations while also providing a bizarre sense of empowerment. He could still move and control stuff. The hospital gym was a sight of sweat and struggle, populated by others like him, people whose lives had been altered by injury or disease. There was a man with a prosthetic leg, a woman relearning to handle a pen after a stroke, and a boy with a spinal damage similar to Drew's, his face a mask of resistance. They didn't say much. "Okay, wait, our second channel link to given in the description, please subscribe." But there was a quiet camaraderie and a shared understanding that no one else could match. Sarah brought him books, music, and anything else to break the silence in the hospital. She'd sit beside his bed, reading aloud from books they'd both enjoyed, her voice a lifeline to the world beyond. But Drew's thoughts wandered. He recalled their house, which they had purchased 2 years prior, with its creaky wooden flooring and steep stairway. He recalled his profession as a graphic designer, the long hours spent sketching at his desk, and the way his fingers moved across a tablet. Can he still do that? Would his hands, now tasked with propelling his chair, maintain the precision he required? He did not pose these questions loudly, neither to Sarah, Mia, or even to himself in the silence of the night. They were too hefty and rough. The first time he stepped outside after the accident, the air hit him like a revelation. It was a bright fall day, the foliage flaming crimson and gold and the sky a clear blue. Sarah pulled his chair down a ramp, and Drew felt the wind on his face and the sun warming his skin. For a little moment, he could imagine himself complete again, just a man having a good day with his wife. But suddenly a curb appeared ahead, a minor impediment that could have been a mountain. Sarah paused, wondering how to go, and Drew's chest constricted. He was not powerless, he reminded himself. He could not be. He reached for the wheels and pushed hard, feeling the chair shock as it cleared the curb. Sarah chuckled, expressing relief and pride, while Drew mustered a smile that did not reach his eyes. Back home, the house was inaccessible. The staircase teased him as it served as a barrier to their bedroom on the second floor. Sarah had already begun looking into ramps, housing changes, and anything else that might make their area more comfortable again. Drew despised the concept of his home, which had once served as a sanctuary, being converted into a project to accommodate his new reality. But he nodded, accepting the adjustments because what else could he do? Sarah deserved a spouse who battled, not one who gave up. So he pushed himself, literally and metaphorically, learning to navigate doorways, reach for goods on high shelves, and restore some sense of independence. The community rallied around them, as it does whenever tragedy occurs. Friends delivered casseroles, neighbors offered to trim the grass, and colleagues sent cards with handwritten letters of encouragement. Drew appreciated it, but also loathed it. He didn't want to be the person in the wheelchair that everybody pitied. He wanted to be Drew, the man who made horrible puns, could fix a faulty faucet, and wished to run an ultramarathon one day. Drew was still there, he reminded himself, buried beneath the weight of his new reality. But locating him was like searching through ruins after an earthquake. Therapy was not solely physical. Drew's week was regularly punctuated by a counselor named Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken man with a talent for asking probing questions. "What are your greatest fears?" Dr. Patel inquired one day, his pen poised on a notepad. Drew stared at the floor, grasping the armrests of his chair. "Losing myself," he eventually murmured, his voice scarcely audible. "We're losing Sarah." Dr. Patel provided no ideas or platitudes in response to the statement losing everything. He simply nodded, allowing Drew to feel the weight of the words. Sarah was his anchor, but she was also struggling. Drew noticed it in the way she moved, how her shoulders dropped when she thought he wasn't looking. After a long day of therapy and doctor's appointments, they sat in the living room with a half-eaten pizza on the coffee table. Sarah was silent, her gaze locked on a place on the wall. "I'm scared, too," she added abruptly, her voice breaking. "I'm not sure how to do this, Drew. I don't know how to be strong enough for both of us." It was her first admission, and it opened a rift between them. They talked for hours, raw and uncensored, about fear, love, and an uncertain future. Drew grabbed her hand firmly, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could be her strength as well. Drew's life settled into a new routine after several months. He returned to work, initially part-time, with his iPad propped up on a makeshift workstation in their remodeled living room. His hands were still his, capable of producing, but they tired more rapidly now. He created logos, posters, and websites, immersing himself into the task with a concentration he had not realized he possessed. It was a lifeline, a method for Drew to remind himself that he was more than simply the guy in the wheelchair. His co-workers were sympathetic, some unnecessarily so, but he learned to negotiate their awkward friendliness, deflecting their sympathy with a quick joke or a change of subject. The wheelchair became less of an adversary and more of an asset. Drew learned how to do wheelies, spin tight circles, and race Sarah down the driveway simply to hear her laugh. He joined a wheelchair basketball league and was amazed by how much he enjoyed the sweat, the competition, and the companionship of men and women who did not regard him as if he were broken. He wasn't the finest player, by any means, but he was out there, moving and living. When Drew scored his first basket, the gym erupted in cheers, and he felt a surge of satisfaction that he hadn't felt in months. There were still gloomy days, when the weight of his injury pressed down on him, and he awoke expecting to swing his legs out of bed only to realize they wouldn't move. There were evenings when he and Sarah clashed, the burden of their new life wearing on their patience. But there were also bright spots, quiet mornings when they drank coffee together, the sun streaming through the window, nights when they watched old movies, laughing at the same lines they'd always liked, days when Drew felt like himself again, if not fully, but enough. He began a blog primarily for himself, to track his progress. He wrote about the accident, the hospital, and the long, difficult process of restoring his life. He wrote of tiny accomplishments like navigating a crowded grocery store, cooking dinner for Sarah, and teaching himself to transfer from his wheelchair to the car without assistance. He also wrote on the larger questions that kept him up at night, such as what it meant to be a man when his body no longer matched the mold he had grown up with. How did he love Sarah the way she deserved when he felt like he was only half himself? The blog gathered traction. First among friends, then strangers, who found solace in his candor and refusal to sugarcoat the hardship. Drew and Sarah took their first trip together a year after the accident, spending the weekend in a lakeside cabin. The cabin was accessible, with ramps and large doorways, but the lake was difficult to navigate. Drew wanted to feel the water, to be a participant rather than just an observer. With Sarah's assistance, he moved to a towel on the beach, the sand cooling beneath him. He dragged himself to the water's edge, exhausted but exhilarated. The water lapped at his hands and arms, and for a brief moment, he was simply a guy in a lake, the world turned right side up. Sarah sat next him, her toes in the water, as they watched the sunset, the sky painted with orange and pink. "We're okay," she whispered, and Drew nodded, believing it for the first time. Life did not return to normal because normal no longer existed. However, it transformed into something new. Drew learned to assess his days based on what he could do rather than what he couldn't. He could love Sarah strongly and unconditionally. He was able to produce designs that were sharper, more significant, and filled with a new perspective. He could inspire people with impairments, and his blog has become a platform where they can see themselves mirrored, not as victims, but as survivors. He could laugh, not at everything, but enough to get by. The accident had turned his world upside down, but Drew was learning to manage it one wheel at a time. Drew was no longer the man he once was, but he was still tenacious, inventive, flawed, and alive. And that, he realized, was sufficient. The tension around Drew has been simmering for weeks, but it has now reached a boiling point, and there is no turning back. Cameron Matheson's portrayal of Drew has walked a tight line between calm control and explosive reprisal, but recent events have pushed him to a point where vengeance is no longer a choice, it is the only way he sees. Those closest to him have seen a small but definite change in his demeanor. He's more guarded, sharper with his words, and strategic in his moves. Drew has been burnt, deceived, and betrayed before, but this time he refuses to be the victim. He's made it obvious that if somebody comes after him, he'll fight back even harder. Drew's rising wrath began with a series of betrayals over the last few months. Trust, which he formerly gave freely, now feels like a weapon wielded against him. Drew's breakup with Michael, his strained connection with Carly, and the rising pressure from Sonny's world have led him to doubt every alliance he believed he had. Behind closed doors, his mind runs late into the night, repeating every lie, whispered manipulation, each calculated maneuver intended to bring him down. It's draining, but it's also fueling his drive to recover control of his story and the authority he believes has been stolen from him. When Cameron Matheson intimated in a recent interview, "I'm gonna punch right back," it wasn't simply a passing comment about Drew's future, it was a guarantee. Drew has been underappreciated for far too long, and he understands that people in power in Port Charles rely on him to continue playing the steady, predictable role. But they're going to discover that Drew isn't afraid to get dirty when it counts. He's been discreetly accumulating information, watching everyone's movements, and connecting dots that others don't even aware exist. And when the time comes to exact his wrath, it will be precise, targeted, and terribly personal. The friction between Drew and Michael has just fueled the fire. What began as a debate over priorities has escalated into something far more serious, uncovering long-buried resentments that neither of them was prepared to face. Drew sees Michael's growing ambition as a betrayal of their previous cooperation, a planned attempt to obtain power at Drew's expense. Michael, on the other hand, believes Drew is blinded by his own rage and refuses to see the big picture. Each of their conversations now has an edge to it, with every word weighted and measured as they circle each other like predators waiting for the other to slip. Carly, as usual, is caught in the midst. She understands how deep Drew's wounds are, but she also worries what he is becoming in his desire for vengeance. There's a darkness creeping into his decisions, a readiness to blur the borders between right and wrong in ways he hadn't considered previously. Carly has tried to approach him and remind him of the man he once was, but Drew isn't listening, not yet. In his mind, trust has already cost him too much, and he believes that if he does not stand up and fight, he will be destroyed by the very people he once considered pals. Drew has begun to form alliances with surprising players in Port Charles. People who were formerly foes are now regarded possible allies, not because he trusts them, but because they share a shared goal, to bring down those who have wronged him. It's a risky game that necessitates secrecy, patience, and the willingness to make compromises along the way. But Drew has come to terms with the sacrifice. He's recognized that redemption may no longer be possible for him. Revenge has become his new compass, directing every decision he takes. Drew's ideas are already being whispered about around the hospital halls, Quartermaine Estate, and Metro Court. People are beginning to speculate, concerned about what will happen if a man like Drew, brilliant, strategic, and severely offended, decides to go on the attack. There are fears that he will target those closest to his betrayers, forcing them to feel the same pain he has. And, while Drew has not acknowledged anything publicly, there is something in his eyes when questioned about his plans, a quiet, steely resolve that says more than words ever could. In the midst of all this upheaval, one nagging question remains: who is Drew's true enemy? Some feel his eyes are set on Michael, others believe Sonny's power over Port Charles has driven Drew over the edge, and a few believe Nina's manipulations are now coming back to haunt her. In reality, Drew's battle is not against a single person. It is against the entire web of power and deception that has imprisoned him, using him as a pawn while others pull the strings. He is no longer ready to play by their rules, instead, he is completely rewriting them. Jason's homecoming has just confused things further. Drew and Jason have a complicated past, one based on fraternity, competitiveness, and an underlying understanding of the worlds they occupy. However, Jason's allegiance to Sonny puts him at odds with Drew's rising ambition to demolish Sonny's empire. Jason recognizes the danger in Drew's path, but he also understands better than anybody what it is like to be driven to the brink. Their interactions are fraught with half-truths and subtle cautions. Jason may eventually have to choose between his allegiance to Sonny and his friendship with Drew, and that decision could ruin everything. Drew's behavior grows increasingly unpredictable as he distances himself from those who formerly supported him. He avoids those who would try to stop him, distancing himself from rational voices and associating himself with others who thrive in turmoil. This transition is disconcerting, but yet strangely empowering. For the first time in a long time, Drew feels in charge of his destiny. Drew plots his revenge, he fights with who he is becoming. Late at night, when the weight of his decisions weighs heavily on him, he wonders if this path will destroy him just as much as it destroys those he is targeting. But every time he contemplates taking a step back, memories of betrayal return, sharpening his resolve once more. He knows he's breaking lines he promised he wouldn't, but he believes survival requires it. In Port Charles, being polite gets you buried, and Drew will not allow anyone bury him. As Drew's ideas take shape in the following weeks, major clashes are expected. Long-buried secrets are about to surface, alliances will be strained, and the balance of power in Port Charles may shift unexpectedly. Drew has always been a fighter, but it's no longer about survival. This is about ensuring that everyone who attempted to break him is held accountable for underestimating him. And when Cameron Matheson hinted that Drew is ready to punch right back, he wasn't exaggerating. Drew's revenge will not be subtle. Drew's decisions will have far-reaching consequences for everyone in Port Charles, whether they are prepared or not. Michael's relationship with Willow may be jeopardized, Carly's stability shaken, Sonny's grip over his enterprise may face its largest challenge yet, and Jason may be forced to make impossible decisions that will change the direction of his life forever. This is more than simply Drew's fight, it might set off a chain reaction of instability and betrayal throughout the town. And yet, beneath all the rage and planning, there's a part of Drew that longs for peace, a part of him that wishes he didn't have to fight the people he once loved and trusted. But Port Charles has taught him the terrible lesson that survival necessitates sacrifice, and Drew has made enough. This time, he is fighting on his own terms, and he is not holding back. The storm is approaching, and everyone in Port Charles can feel it. Drew has been misjudged for the final time, and those who have wronged him are about to learn a hard lesson. You can only push a man so far before he pushes back. When he eventually carries out his plan, it will be more than just vengeance. It will be about restoring his authority, dignity, and future. And once the dust settles, nothing in Port Charles will be the same again. Drew's vengeance is no longer just an emotional reaction, it is a meticulously planned strategy that he has been discreetly implementing piece by piece. He is not the same man who once attempted to arbitrate, compromise, and maintain peace in Port Charles. Every restless night has driven him farther into his plans, and Drew has reached a point where there is no turning back. Anyone paying close attention can see his transformation. The placid veneer remains, but there is a fire behind his eyes that refuses to be extinguished. Drew's patience is one of his most dangerous qualities right now. He isn't lashing out or acting rashly. Instead, he waits, watches, and gathers all of his weapons before striking. Drew knows his foes anticipate him to blow up and make blunders in fury, but his silence is his greatest advantage. He has been playing the long game, and the more his opponents underestimate him, the more devastating his counterattack will be when it arrives. Michael, more than anybody else, has begun to sense the shift. What used to be simple chats have devolved into stressful exchanges laced with unsaid accusations and subtle threats. Every meeting between them ends with unresolved tension in the air, and Willow is beginning to worry about what this prolonged feud means for her family. She begs Michael to back off and give Drew space, but Michael refuses because he fears Drew is spiraling out of control and could damage everything they've achieved. The more Michael presses, the more determined Drew is to remind him of who he is dealing with. Meanwhile, Carly's rising anxieties force her into an uncomfortable position. She must choose sides. For months, she has tried to act as a bridge between Drew and Michael, hoping to protect them from hurting each other. But Carly's influence is dwindling, and Drew's increasing isolation makes it more difficult for her to contact him. Every time she confronts him about his decisions, he draws away a little more, certain that Carly's loyalty to Michael is stronger than her loyalty to him. She can feel the distance expanding, which scares her since she knows Drew well enough to know that when he finally makes his move, it will be premeditated, explosive, and impossible to reverse. Jason's involvement just complicates matters. He sees the storm gathering between Drew, Michael, and Sunny, and he understands how terrible the situation could become. Jason has always been a stable presence in tumultuous situations, but even he is struggling to handle the developing fissures. His friendship with Drew is based on a convoluted history of brotherhood and rivalry, and he is torn between maintaining Sunny's empire and keeping Drew from going too far. Every discussion Jason has with Drew carries a weight neither of them can express. They are on opposing sides of a conflict neither asked for, but neither is prepared to abandon. Drew has begun to work on a complex network of alliances. He's quietly reaching out to others who share his frustrations, gathering information, and exploiting secrets that could tip the balance of power in Port Charles. Some of Drew's new pals are unexpected, and a couple are dangerous, the types of people he previously vowed he'd never work with. But now, morality isn't his top focus. Winning is. Drew sees every bit of information, vulnerability, and hidden fact as a weapon, and he's ready to use them all when the time comes. There is also rising speculation that Nina's tactics may come back to harm her in ways she never expected. Drew hasn't said it openly, but there are evidence he hasn't forgotten her involvement in exposing Carly and causing trouble. Nina has been pacing around the Metro court with an uneasy calm, knowing Drew's seething rage but unsure when, or if, it will eventually arrive at her doorstep. Her fear is not unwarranted. Drew is not the sort to forgive lightly, and while Nina believes her marriage to Sunny has secured her position, she may have overestimated Drew's willingness to undermine everything she has created. Drew's activities are already having an impact, even before his plan is fully implemented. The Quartermaines are concerned about the developing division in their family. The Corinthos group is ready for future upheaval, with Sunny becoming increasingly concerned about Drew's loyalties. And as stories traveled throughout the hospital, the Metro court, and every backroom deal in Port Charles, it became evident that Drew's quiet, simmering hatred was more dangerous than anybody anticipated. In his calmer moments, Drew considers how much all of this is costing him. He is aware that crossing these borders may result in the loss of a part of himself, but he has accepted this. In his perspective, he was forced into this situation by people who lied, deceived, and exploited him until he had nothing left. Now it's his chance to change the script. He isn't interested in following anyone else's rules anymore. He's rewriting them, and once he's finished, everyone who thought they had authority over him will be left scurrying to clean up the mess.